Want to welcome everyone to today's virtual Lunch and Learn, creating a community that is trauma competent. And it's presented by Wood County Family and Children First Council. And I want to thank everybody for spending their lunch hour with us, whether they're eating or not. It's good to have you here. Also want to mention that our Lunch and Learns are sponsored by Paramount, and chamber investors are given an opportunity to save on health insurance through the MEWA program. So we always want to mention them for being our sponsors. So our speakers today are Kathy Mull, who is a licensed social worker and the executive director of The Cocoon, and Angela Patchen, who is also a licensed independent social worker, and she works for the Wood County Educational Service Center. So both of these women are obviously very passionate about mental health and trauma. And we're really fortunate to have you two talking with us today on such an important topic right now. And in a lot of ways, I think that I was talking to Angela before anyone else came on, and, you know, there's just so much, you know, depression and anxiety and everything right now. And depending on who you're rooting for in the election, you know, it may get better, it may get worse. So, you know, hopefully, you know, we can have some tools to be able to help other people, you know, work through those issues. So if in the audience, if you have any questions, go ahead and use the chat feature at the bottom, type in any questions, and we'll be sure to talk about those questions when they're done speaking. So I guess, Angela, you said you were going to open up first. So if you want to go ahead and take the floor, let me share my screen for you.
All right. Yeah, I said it's a strange thing to say, you know, but I enjoy talking about trauma. I should probably say that I enjoy helping other people have a better understanding of trauma. So it's still saying on my end, host disabled, participant screen sharing.
Okay, here we go. Let's try this.
Ah, there we go. Wait a minute.
That work? Did you click share screen on the bottom of yours?
I did, but it's not showing me. Hang on.
Well,
there we go. Wait, I think I've got it. Okay. No, that's
not popping up.
Except that's not what I wanted to share. Hang on a second.
Well, you know what? We're not seeing anything anyway. So hang on a minute here. I do not know why I'm having issues here. I have it set.
Okay, I think I've got it now. Can you see it now?
Yay, there we go.
Okay, perfect. Good. All right. All right, so I'm going to start with a little bit of an intro to trauma. I don't know how much folks know about it or what you've heard, so I'm just going to kind of go through a little bit of the basics about trauma in general. These are the goals for the training. I'm going to cover the basic information first about how types of trauma and how it affects individuals, and then Kathy's going to focus on those other two in a minute. So what is trauma? So just defining it, it's the threat to life or injury of a loved one. So it could be something that happens to somebody else, somebody that you know or care about, or they even say like an icon or something like that, like folks that experience the suicide of someone that they care about, you know, that can have an effect on someone also. It can be a threat to yourself. So your own life or safety. So it doesn't have to be that you thought you were going to die. It can just be that, you know, you felt really unsafe in a situation, or it can be continuing feelings of fear or hopelessness. So, and again, these can even be things that are maybe even seen on TV. So being the target or victim of a trauma, so it can be that direct exposure to oneself. It can be seeing something else happen, like I said, even on TV. Or learning that something traumatic happened to someone that's close to you or that you care about. So again, some examples or some experiences that we've heard about, like the witnessed event. So particularly when we're thinking about children, when we did this training, when I was trained in this program, the presenter gave an example of a young child that I think this was during like Hurricane Katrina or one of the big hurricanes, was seeing the news every day and think that child thought and was becoming very distressed, and they ended up getting them some help. And what they found out was that that child didn't understand that that was one hurricane that had happened and that it was continuous news coverage of it. That child thought that there was like a new hurricane every day. So again, with children, sometimes it's their understanding of the event. And so that child was thinking, that there were these multiple hurricanes happening all the time. Not that one hurricane isn't bad enough, but imagine, the layering of that. When we also talk about trauma, we talk about like there are acute traumas. So like a one-time event, hopefully a one-time event. I said that in one training when I said like a car accident, and somebody said, I've had a lot of those. So, I mean, if you're a bad driver, it could be multiple times that you experience the one bad thing, but, or a dog bite, or, so something that's generally like a one-time thing that somebody experiences. Then there's chronic traumas. So chronic trauma is something like that continuously happens, that happens over and over and over again. So you might think of sexual abuse, physical abuse, neglect, really even poverty, living without with the consistent lack of basic needs being met, that kind of thing. So and then there's what they call complex trauma. Sorry, I just lost the word for a second because it wasn't on my screen. I forgot it. Complex trauma, where it's kind of a layering effect. And she even used, talked about like, if you had a car accident and then you also have food insecurity, and you also have physical abuse, and you also have, so there's that layering effect that can happen as well when we're talking about trauma. So there's the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, and this came out of a couple of doctors, Vincent Folletti and Robert Anda. And so Dr. Folletti worked at a obesity clinic, so folks that had to lose 100 pounds or more. So it was pretty extreme weight loss. And they worked with folks, and they found that they would be successful, and they'd lose a lot of weight, and then they found that there was this number of people that would just drop out of the study, or they wouldn't see them again, or they put the weight back on, kind of a thing. And so he wanted to figure out why that was happening, because this was he had this very successful program for weight loss. But when the folks start putting weight back on and are going backwards, that's not a good way to stay in business. So he was trying to figure out what's happening. And he devised a questionnaire, and he was asking folks questions. And I even heard him speak about this. And the way he came across the ACEs was really kind of by accident. He misread one of the questions that he meant to ask, or asked it in a different way. And actually got a surprising response, and it was about sexual abuse. So he meant to say something about at what age did you start having weight problems or something, and somehow asked the question, like I said, incorrectly, and this woman ended up disclosing sexual abuse at a very young age, like at the age of 4. And it was kind of this aha moment of, oh my gosh, wait a minute, what I mean, that's horrible. And then as he started to talk to folks, he found more and more of this, that they were experiencing these different things. So the Adverse Childhood Experiences is just 10. It's limited to 10 items. So not by any means, are these the only kinds of trauma that people can experience, right? Whoops, sorry, skip my slide ahead. But these aren't like the 10 worst, but these were the 10 that came up the most common in the folks that he was talking to. And so what he found was that was a lot of emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional neglect, and physical neglect, loss or abandonment. So that would be like divorce or separation of parents, domestic violence, caregiver with an alcohol or drug problem, caregiver with a mental health problem, or a household member in prison. So those 10 things. And when they're doing an ACEs score, you don't you just get 1 point essentially for each thing that's happened to you. So it's not like I was emotionally abused multiple times. It's just like if you experienced emotional abuse at all prior to the age of 18. So this was a retrospective study. So this was all adults. When he partnered with Dr. Anda at the CDC, this was all done with adults that had insurance, that were employed. Most of them were college educated. Most of them were white. There was like 72% white. Most of them, like I said, were college educated, employed folks with insurance. So you can imagine that if we did this with other groups, we might see higher incidence in different areas, different living circumstances, that kind of thing. And so what I said, they assigned 1 point for each of these items that they had in their life. And they found that the higher your ACEs score was, the higher your risk for these kinds of things: negative coping mechanisms, smoking, severe obesity, suicide attempts, alcoholism, drug abuse, 50 or more sexual partners, repetition of the original trauma, self-injury, eating disorders, even early death. And there seems to be a key number around 4. 4 or more seems to be this magic number that's particularly bad. So in Wood County, we started asking these questions. I don't know if people are aware, but in Wood County, we do a survey of youth every 2 years. The Adamus Board sponsors us doing a survey of youth in all of the schools. So we survey about 10,000 students in the Wood County schools from 5th through 12th grade. So it's not all the kids, obviously, it's just 5th through 12th. And 5th and 6th graders get some different questions than some of the older kids, the 7th through 12th graders. But we added the ACEs questions a couple years ago, about 2 years ago. Excuse me, hang on 1 second. Sorry about that. My dogs decided to start howling all of a sudden. I don't know why. They're feeling lonely downstairs, I guess, and just decided to start howling. So I don't know if you could hear them or not, but it was going to distract me. So we started asking these questions because it's not really a screener. The ACEs wasn't designed that way, but we wanted to know what's happening in our community. And so we added these questions to the survey, the 10 ACE questions. And you can see on the screen the questions themselves, and then, or, not exactly the questions, but, but the summary of what the question was about. And then what the responses were for the 7th through 12th graders from 2018 to 2020. So these are the only years we've asked it so far. I think, one of the things that might stand out for us is like the separation or divorce. Over 30% of kids, so 1 in 3 kids, more than 1 in 3 kids has experienced separation or divorce. Right behind that, let's see, sorry, I'm trying to do this, looking at which number is the biggest, is living with somebody that has a mental illness. So this isn't the children themselves. This is a parent or household member has mental illness, and how much that even went up a couple of percentage points from 2018 to 2020. And then we have, emotional neglect. I think if we can pull some positive things out of here, physical abuse, sexual abuse, physical neglect, those are fairly low. I mean, of course, we would love to see those numbers at 0, but those are fairly low numbers, which I think is kind of a positive thing. But it's kind of scary that emotional neglect, emotional abuse, that those are as high as they are. So just some things to, just again, that was with youth, and then. What we also found when we compared those in our surveys was the number of youth that reported those things and the number that also reported vaping. And you can see how much that goes up. Vaping in the last 30 days, vaping marijuana, suicide ideation, it doubles from 0 ACEs to having 1 ACE, and doubles almost again to 2 ACEs, and, and 4 and above, and how high that is. So suicide ideation versus suicide attempts. So suicide ideation is thinking about it. Suicide attempts means that they made an attempt on their life. I've heard people try to qualify that and say, well, but maybe they just, took took a few pills and, they thought that 4 Tylenol would kill them, instead of taking 2 Tylenol. And I don't care if it was an actual, like a viable attempt. I think the fact that they thought they were going to die is serious, right? Like I don't, even if it, even if they weren't really at risk of dying, if their intent was to end their lives, then I think that that's something that we should take seriously. And hopelessness was a new question. We just added that in the 2020 survey. That was feeling hopeless or feeling sad or not wanting to participate in activities that you normally participate in for a period of 2 weeks or more, that kind of thing. So it was about feeling hopeless. And again, you can see how high that is when you're experiencing multiple ACEs. And it didn't matter which ACEs, just any 4 or more, and how bad that is for them. So again, we actually did this with youth, the students in the schools. And then I don't know if you're aware, but the Wood County Health Department does a survey every 3 years of adults in the county. So they would have another one. These are from the 2018 survey. I've got that down at the bottom. So they'll be doing another survey again in 2021. And these were some of the adult questions. So this was all the adults that were surveyed. And theirs is a sample survey. So again, like I said, ours within the schools is a population survey, and the health department doesn't do a population survey, they do a sample survey. And our numbers are pretty close. I mean, it tells you that it's pretty good what they're doing. When we compare the numbers of youth and from their survey and our survey. But these were adults reporting the number of ACEs that they experienced prior to the age of 18. How many of them live with somebody that was separated, or live with parents that were separated or divorced, had a problem. Somebody in the house had a problem with alcohol, mental illness, etc. And then 1 in 14, 7% of adults experience 4 or more ACEs. So, not a high number, like I said, but still effective. There can be causing some adverse experiences in their lives. And then this is also from that survey. So this was those who had experienced 4 or more ACEs versus those who did not have any ACEs, so 0 ACEs, and kind of comparing. So those with 4 or more ACEs were about 8% more likely to have a problem drinking, versus those that had experienced none, more likely to be overweight, etc. So those are, again, just some numbers that I pulled out to kind of show, what, sometimes we have these statistics from big fancy surveys, and we say, yeah, but that's somewhere else. That was in California, that wasn't here in Wood County. But we do have some of this data, and we show that it still is a problem here in Wood County. So that was all that I had in my part, was just the down and dirty introduction to trauma. So Kathy will take over from here.
All right, thanks, Angie. I'm going to see if I can share my screen now and see if I can get this to work.
While you're doing that, I'll make one more comment that I meant to throw in here. I thought of it last night and I realized I didn't have it on a slide. And that's that this is predictive, not prescriptive. So you talk about causation and correlation, right? So these things are correlated. We can't particularly say that because of, the traumas that you've experienced. So we don't want to say like, well, you've had 4 ACEs, like sorry, that's it. We can't do anything more for you. That it's not prescriptive. It doesn't mean that you absolutely will have, right? It means more likely. So I just wanted to, again, make sure that I threw that out there.
All right, let's see if I can make this work here.
I saw it for a second and now it's gone.
Yeah, I'm not sure what it was
Okay.
doing. I've got 2 screens. My computer has 2 screens, and I think sometimes it doesn't know which one to pick. All right, can you see it?
It says Kathy Mole has started screen sharing. Double click to enter full screen mode. But I'm not seeing the slide yet.
Not sure what we're doing here. Okay.
No, I just all see all the Zoom squares again.
All right, come on. Okay, let's try it now. All right, can you see it?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, awesome. All right, so thank you, Angie. Angie laid a really good foundation for us in terms of what we see right here in the Wood County community as far as trauma goes. And so my hope is that today I can help draw some connection between the trauma that we know that people in our communities are experiencing, and then how that manifests us really in just sort of all of the ways that we interact. So how we interact in the workplaces, how we interact in our social settings, all of those types of things. And so, you know, the ACEs are really, and I have a comparison that I'm going to show you about how the ACEs can affect folks in the workplace. But, you know, the ACEs that Angie was talking about really talk about experiences that we've had as children. And then looking at those sort of throughout our lifespan and how they affect us as we grow older. Right. And so, you know, the last number that Angie kind of left you all with is that, you know, we know that, you know, about 7% of folks, you know, are experiencing 4 or more ACEs. And those are the folks that are growing up, and then we're employing them in our workplaces. And so we really, you know, our hope today is that I'm not expecting all of you all to walk away from here and then feel like you have to be counselors and that you have to take care of every single employee's personal issue. And that, you know, with those things, and that employees' personal issues trump their responsibilities for doing their required tasks as an employee, because that's absolutely not the case. But the hope is that sometimes when we're seeing behaviors or things in employees that are concerning to us, and even for those of us who serve the public, sometimes we see a lot of these things in folks that are that are coming into our businesses. We see a lot of those behaviors. I mean, I think all of us can probably think of a time that we had that really, you know, problematic customer, or that really problematic client, or whatever that is, that sometimes makes us want to pull our hair out. And we're not so sure exactly how to respond to them, or sometimes we're not sure why they're responding in the way that they're responding. And so this will hopefully just give us some tools to be able to better manage those situations. And then hopefully, particularly for our employees, get them connected to somebody that can then help them address those trauma behaviors and those trauma histories, so that they can then, you know, hopefully be a little bit more able to you know, carry out the duties and responsibilities. So up here, hopefully y'all can see again, my screens are doing something funny since I have 2 of them, but Angie kind of touched on the first goal, and then I'm going to talk a little bit again about how this manifests for us in businesses. So thinking about individuals that we are employing that are coming in our doors who most likely have at least some trauma history. You know, if we think about, you know, all of the different things that we experience in our lifetimes, every single one of us is going to experience at least one traumatic event. So if you did not realize that, I'm really sorry to tell you that at this point, but every single one of us will experience at least one traumatic event in our lifetime. Unfortunately, some of us experience multiple of those. And depending upon the severity of them, depending upon the ability or the opportunity that I've had to be able to heal from them, is really going to look different for everybody and what that manifests for us. But what we know is that when we don't address trauma in individuals, these are the things that become much more difficult for them. So dealing with change. When we have experienced trauma and we are seeing the world from that lens, our thinking really becomes a lot more black and white. There's a lot less gray area. And a lot of that is because our functioning level really becomes survival mode. So it's I'm surviving or I'm not surviving. There's not an in between there. There's nothing like I might kind of survive. Our brain really thinks I'm surviving or I'm not surviving. So what happens for me is that when I'm in that place where I'm really feeling things out through a trauma lens, dealing with change becomes very difficult. And so when you think about what that means for a workplace, we go through change all the time, right? Our workplaces are constantly changing. And so when you have employees who are struggling with that change, sometimes it might be something bigger that's going on for them that makes it a little bit more difficult for them to adapt as quickly to that change as maybe other folks would. I think that, Angie and I were having this conversation earlier in the week, that the timing about talking about this couldn't be any better, because 2020 has just been a year of change, of struggle, of stress, of irregardless of what issue we're looking at, 2020 continues to just keep throwing things at us. And so we're seeing more and more folks who are really struggling with a lot of these kinds of things. So dealing with change is one thing that we see that becomes very difficult. Diversity, which again goes back sort of to that black and white thinking, is that folks that are struggling with their trauma responses or struggling with managing their trauma have much more difficulty in just allowing diversity to be something that they're much more willing to embrace. Creativity gets very stifled. And so creativity for most people flows in what's considered to be a low stress environment. So if I'm not feeling like I am living or working or managing things in a low stress environment, my creativity very much can get stifled. And so if you're expecting your employee to be able to take on some of that role, that's something that we may see, that the trauma makes it much more difficult for them to do that. The quality management is another thing that we see. So attention to detail, turning things in on time, following, guidelines, mandates, those kinds of things become much more difficult for folks who have an underlying trauma history that they're trying to manage. One of the things that we saw very clearly with a woman that we worked with through Cocoon is that she had been in an abusive relationship for many, many, many years. And abusive relationships are all about power and control. So you typically have one member in that relationship who has all of the power and control over the relationship, over the other person, typically over the finances, all of those kinds of things. And his large tactic in that relationship was to tear down her self-esteem and make her feel like no matter what she did, she could not do anything right. And so when she came to stay with us in our shelter facility, she brought all of that with her. She brought all of those feelings of low self-esteem. She brought all of those feelings of being a screw up, of not being able to do anything right. And so we, part of what we were working with her on was to help her address those issues and work through them. But what we found is one of the biggest things she wanted to do when she got with us, she wanted to get a job, which, for most of us, that's usually, one or two on our priority list, but she couldn't keep a job. Because anytime anybody tried to give her constructive criticism or constructive ways to change something, she immediately thought she was a failure. She immediately thought she was a screw up. She immediately thought that her boss was the meanest person on the planet, because she immediately associated any type of somebody telling her that she wasn't doing something right to what had happened to her in her relationship. And so we were able to work with her on our end to try to help her work through that. But not from an employer perspective, not knowing how to approach that or have those kinds of conversations with her made that relationship between her and the employer, much more contentious, because she wasn't able to take any sort of, like I said, kind of constructive feedback. So along with that team approach a lot of times becomes something that's very difficult for folks who are working through trauma responses. Absenteeism tends to go up. You see folks calling off from work a lot when they're working through some kind of trauma response. And same thing, your productivity. A lot of times see your productivity go down as folks are trying to work through what that means for them. And I think that, one of the things that is difficult for us to understand is that your trauma, even if the incident is sort of a one and done, the after effects of that sometimes take a very long time. And so, I might have, if I use Angie's example, I might have witnessed that car accident and you think, okay, well, by day 5, you should be fine. That's not necessarily the case. Sometimes it takes a while to work through those things. If you've ever been in a nasty car accident and then you try to get back behind the wheel of a car, and how difficult that is, no matter how much you try to talk yourself into it and say, I know what I'm doing. I know I'm a good driver. I know I'm safe. You still get shaky behind the wheel. You still get a little bit more nervous about all the drivers around you and what are they doing, because the last time I, drove down this road, or the last time. And so the same thing happens with folks who are experiencing all other types of traumas is that unfortunately they're bringing that into the workplace, and it's affecting their ability to be able to be and sometimes quality employees. So why should we care about this as employers? So what we know is 60% of employee absences can be traced back to stress-related psychological problems. So 60% of the time when your employees are calling off from work, it's not because they don't like their job. It's not because they're trying to be difficult. It's typically because their stress level is to a point where they feel like, you know what, I just can't do this today, or I can't pull myself out of bed, or whatever it is. We tend to see more accidents or near accidents, you know, in factories or other settings where people are doing more physical type of labor. You know, what we also know is that if we think about bringing the trauma into the workplace, folks who are feeling unsafe in settings outside of the workplace, unfortunately, a lot of times that stuff follows as well. So you hear about, you know, domestic violence making its way into the workplace. You hear about stalking making its way into the workplace. And so recognizing that sometimes we can't as easily pull those two things out. I also put some numbers up there for you. I mean, studies show us that this is how much companies are losing per year across the United States in, you know, trauma-related issues, right? So chronic back pain, depression, you know, Angie talks about, you know, the chemical dependency and the mental health. I mean, the amount of money that companies are losing in absenteeism because we're maybe not addressing the trauma issue in a way that we could to try to help diminish some of those effects. So this graphic shows you, kind of draws the connection between what Angie was talking about the ACEs scores and how it impairs worker performance. So if you look at, you know, the biggest ones that we see are the absenteeism, you know, the serious problems performing the job, and then we threw in another one about financial problems. And as you can see, you get more incidents of these, the more ACEs somebody has. And so again, recognizing that the more that these trauma histories follow, the more that they're going to have some kind of effect on our workplace. So I put again some things of what we could very concretely look for, and I don't say these things again because it means we need to be digging into people's personal lives, but sometimes taking a step back and just saying like, hey, is something going on? I've seen these kinds of things happening in your work performance, and taking a step back and asking some of those questions before we immediately go to sort of a punitive or corrective process can sometimes help us figure out how to best help that employee. So if you're like, well, how am I even going to know if these things are going on with my employees without, you know, asking a whole bunch of questions? These are the things that you will most likely start to see. Excess absenteeism. And it could be that that's been the employee sort of chronic issue, that they're just always calling off. It could be that, you know, for a long time, you know, you had an employee who had perfect attendance, and now all of a sudden they're calling you quite frequently, telling you that they can't come into work. Increased incidences of illness. So the same thing, that you're hearing or finding that they just don't seem to be feeling like themselves. And the poor decision making. So, you know, a lot of times, again, you might see, you know, that you had an employee who really didn't struggle with this. And now all of a sudden you're questioning some of their decisions that they're making, some of their responses to you. Again, like, where is this coming from? And a lot of times what we know is that if I'm processing through some kind of trauma, my confidence and my ability to be able to make good decisions diminishes. And part of that is, again, some of it goes back to that black and white thinking, and some of it goes back to, well, you know what, I just had this really terrible thing happen to me, and I didn't do that all that well. So therefore, I'm not really sure that I can make good decisions moving forward. And so we tend to see that you'll see that level of confidence sometimes dropping in your employees. Damage interpersonal relationships. So if you have an employee who tends to be a pretty dynamic team player, you know, who, you know, maybe like to converse with their coworkers, you know, sometimes maybe even too much, you know, but had sort of a really good dynamic and give and take with other people in the office, and all of a sudden they're just sort of shying away from any kind of social interaction, you know, again, sort of their demeanor starts to change, is something that you're going to want to be paying attention to. Breaking down in communication, you know, starting to lie or hide mistakes because, you know, they're struggling to be able to perform their work in the way that we would expect them to do. Change in work habits is sort of the same kind of thing, or just change in their overall demeanor. So their personality seems to be a little bit different. Their appearance seems to be different. So somebody who used to come to work and was all put together every day, and all of a sudden it looks like maybe they've just rolled out of bed. That they're not, I have one employee in my office that I matches from head to toe every day. I give her so much credit. I don't know how she does it. Everything matches, the shoes, the jewelry, her tag, like her lanyard that she wears for her. And so I would be very alarmed if all of a sudden she started coming in and did not look that put together, because that's her thing. And so it might, raise me to ask a couple of questions about what might be happening for her. These are some things that we can see sometimes kind of early on with our employees that might clue us in that there's something else going on for them. And saying, you know what, maybe I had to just take a step back and have a conversation with that employee to see, again, not prying to get all kinds of details, but just see if something might be going on. A lot of times what we also know is that when you are really in the thick of managing the trauma that's happening, whether you're trying to deal with all of the stuff that's going on at home, or you're trying to deal with some kind of stressor outside of that, maybe it's a sick family member. I mean, maybe it's a mom that's really sick, grandma's really sick. Maybe it's, financial stressors, whatever those things are. Most of us like to feel like we've got it all together. And so I'm going to do everything I can to hold it together, to keep it together, to put on this appearance that I'm making it and I'm doing it, and nobody's going to know all of these other things that are happening behind the scenes. And there's a point where we just can no longer do that. And that's when we start to see some of these very specific symptoms happening, but I might not know that it's happening. Like I might not realize that you can see it. So when you say to me, gee, you know what, you've really been calling off a lot, what's going on? I might be like, oh my, really? Like I didn't realize it had been that frequent. Or you know what, you've missed like 5 deadlines and I've had to remind you 5 times to turn in something that you needed to do. And I might not have, that might just have kind of not been as obvious to me as it is to you. And it opens up those lines of communication to talk about what might be going on. So if we want to sort of switch a little bit about how we approach some of these issues that I think traditionally we've seen a lot of them as needing to be disciplinary issues, or these are my problem employees, right? You've all probably heard the anecdote that you spend about 80% of your time dealing with your 2 or 3 problematic employees, right? They get the most attention. And so if we kind of think about how do we change our approach a little bit in order to maybe be able to manage that and get results in some ways sort of quicker that we're looking for those employees. It's really about thinking about people in their whole entire context of their lives. We all like to say, when you walk through the door at the workplace, you leave everything else behind you. Nobody does that. It's not possible. If I've got a sick child at home, I'm not thinking about my sick child at home when I come to work, no matter how many times you tell me not to do that. That's just not possible. I'm not looking at my phone every hour to see if somebody's calling because I'm really worried about, my mother who's in the hospital, right? Like that's just not going to happen. If I've got an abusive partner at home who doesn't want me to be at work, I'm not going to not be thinking about what happens when I walk through that door at the end of the day. Or I'm not going to be thinking about the big bill that I have now because I crashed my car last week. I can try really hard, but it's not going to happen. And so if we can think about the people who are coming in our doors with their entire context of their lives, right? And that how do we help meld those things in a way that allows them to be a productive employee, allows them to meet those expectations, but also gives them sort of a sense of like, I value you as a human being, and that we can do this in some ways sort of together. So what we typically think is, what do I do when a person's behavior gets in the way of the work, right? What's my response? If I'm the employer, if I'm the supervisor, if I'm the boss, and I've got an employee who's not performing, my first thing is, okay, what do I do about it? How do I fix it? That's my job, right? If we can flip that and think about, what if trauma's impact is getting in the way of their work? What if there's something else going on? And it doesn't have to be trauma. Angie and I are here to talk about trauma. You can flip that word and you can use it about anything else. What if, some kind of stressor is getting in their way? But what if I start there and say, what's going on for this person that they're not able to meet my expectations? They're not able to do what I'm asking them to do. What that also does is it opens up a dialogue. So there's some give and take to say, you know what, I really need you to be on time every day. So how do we make that work? How do I make sure that you get here on time every day? What's keeping you from getting to work on time every day? And what we might realize is that, you know, all of a sudden, you know what, my mom was my childcare person, and now all of a sudden my mom can't be my childcare person. So I'm scrambling every morning to figure out what to do with my kids to get them on the bus, to get them ready, whatever that is. As an employer, that's not my problem, but I might be able to give a little bit of grace to be able to figure out how to help them solve that problem, right? And so having some of those dialogues might help us be able to manage that a little bit differently. So if we're going to respond sort of from that different lens, there's really what I consider to be the 3 R's. So there's realizing that trauma happens to all of us, which is what Angie spent a long time talking to us about. It's recognizing it in my employees. So hopefully I've given you some tools to be able to do that. And then it's responding, right? So how do I respond to that? So I gave you some thing. I'm not going to read through these because I feel like, you know, everybody can read. That's my kind of my pet peeve. But I gave you some examples of what does realizing mean, you know, what does recognizing mean when we're really thinking about coming at it from this lens, and then what does responding mean, right? So that's fully integrating all of that knowledge into our policies, our practices, our procedures, having our HR folks be aware of what the expectations are around how we have these conversations with our employees. What research has showed us is the main reason that employees do not disclose about some traumatic event or some other stressor that's going on for them outside of the workplace is fear of stigma and discrimination. That they are absolutely afraid of what is somebody going to say to me when I disclose that information. And so if we can set up a work environment where there's that level of safety to say, you know what, you can share some of these things within reason. Again, I can't be your counselor. I can't be the one that's expected to fix it for you, but it's a safe place for you to come and tell me that this is going on so that maybe we can put a plan together for how we're going to address it moving forward. Other reasons that folks have given about not feeling safe disclosing trauma is not feeling that that's a safe environment for me to share that kind of information. I don't think my employer is going to do anything. I don't think they're going to care. So I'm not going to say anything because doesn't matter to them. Or I'm going to lose my job. That as soon as I tell them that this is going on, the first thing that's going to happen is I'm going to get fired. And so keeping that information to themselves. A lot of times what we don't see happening is that then it's just coming out in all kinds of other places and there's no context for it, right? So if I'm not sharing those things, then nobody knows the reasons as to why my work performance might be slipping. So some of the things that we can do to try to create an environment that allows us to have sort of this person and employer perspective kind of melding or coming together is, you know, first thing, educate your management about the hidden costs. You know, why is this something that you should care about? Why is this something that you should feel that you can talk to your employees about? Why does it matter? You know, having, again, a little bit of an understanding, you know, for what it means for folks who are coming in our doors. And then having those clear lines for open communication. So setting up an environment where I feel confident enough that there's somebody in that organization that I can go to and I can talk to when I'm struggling, or that I can share that something's happening. And then helping whoever it is it your HR, is it your supervisors, whoever you require in your agency to have these conversations, to give them a little bit of tools about how to have these conversations. Because I think the other reason that we don't open up the door to have these conversations is because we don't know what to say. When your employee comes to you and says, I don't feel safe in my house, my husband has been beating me for the last 5 years, who knows what to say to that? I'm sorry that's happening. Like, we don't know what to say to that. And we don't know how to help. So we feel helpless. And so we shy away from those conversations a lot of times because we don't know how or what to say. And so helping your HR people or your management people know how to say, you know what, thank you for sharing that information with me. I'm sure it took a lot of courage for you to come in here and tell me that. How can I help you? Like, what can be helpful to you? How can we work together? and then making referrals. It's not, again, it's not about solving that problem, you know, but if it's an issue, is if I use the example of domestic violence, refer them to us at Cocoon. We can help then work through all of those pieces. If it's somebody who's coming and sharing about some kind of, you know, mental health issue or anxiety issue, you know, there's lots of agencies out there, and I know Angie can talk about that for a minute when we get to sort of some resources, but there's lots of agencies out there that we can then refer to. Use your EAP program if you have one of those, but getting them connected to those places where the employees can then get the help that they need. It's also about helping your management or your HR draw the connections between cause and effect. So some of those things that we've been talking about is that, you know, when we're experiencing this trauma, this is what it looks like in the workplace, right? This is what we're seeing. These are the kinds of behaviors that we're seeing. This is why it makes it difficult for some folks to be able to do well. And then, you know, you can always offer opportunities for folks to get access to stress relieving activities. You know, how to cope with, you know, when things are tough. You know, there's ways that you can offer sort of these, you know, staff building workshops or, you know, continuing education or something that's really across the board. You know, we at Cocoon, you know, we see trauma every single day. We see trauma every time we answer the crisis line. We see trauma every single time a family walks through our doors in our shelter facility. So my staff live and breathe it every day. They see it, they live and breathe it with all of the people that we're working with. So to me, particularly because that's the kind of work that we do, I feel like I have an obligation to make sure that my staff have the outlets to be able to take care of themselves and to be able to process that. So we do self-care Fridays, and we take a little bit of time to talk about what are you doing to, you know, what are you doing to take care of yourself? You know, those kinds of things. So there's a way that, I mean, you don't have to do it as often as something that, you know, we do in our doors, but there's a way that you can, again, sort of set up that environment of, you know, I'm giving you the opportunity to be doing something that's about you and taking care of yourself. You know, making sure that mental health support is kind of blasted out throughout your agency. Can you include it in your health insurance policies? Can you have a blurb in your policies and procedures that says we care about, you know, your mental health and want to be able to get you connected if you feel like something's, you know, happening. It's similar to what we do when we think about folks that are you know, struggling with substance use. A lot of us have policies that say we try treatment first, right? Can we get you some treatment before we go down this really punitive road? You know, we can do some of that same stuff with addressing mental health issues with our employees. So if we've done those things and we've set up the environment and we feel like, again, our managers, our supervisors, our HR folks are ready to have these conversations, here's some things we can do. First, make sure you have a list of resources so that you're ready to refer. So again, I don't feel like I have to be the counselor, but I'm ready to refer to the places that can do that. Ask your employees about what they need. That really should be the first question. When somebody discloses something, what do you need? How can I help you? You know, what is it that you think would make a difference? You know, when I've experienced something traumatic, it typically is coupled with a feeling of loss of control or a loss of power. So every time I'm reliving those feelings, I feel like I don't have control and I feel like I don't have power. So sometimes just the simple act of saying, how can we work through this together? So, you know, if my employer comes to me and says, I'm really, really concerned because you are just continuously, you know, not meeting your deadlines. You're just every time we've had this conversation many times. I don't see anything changing. I am immediately probably going to go to that place about, oh crap, I'm going to get fired. Right. And then I might shut down. I might get defensive. I might get angry. And all of a sudden I feel another opportunity where I don't have any power or control. And so if we can sometimes just say, I feel like we need to talk about what is the reason that you're not able to meet these deadlines. How can we solve this problem together? Then employee is probably much more willing to engage in some conversation with you and some problem solving instead of immediately getting defensive and going to doomsday, right? Well, it doesn't matter what I do. It doesn't matter what I say, just come fire me anyways, right? Instead of going there, we can have some of that dialogue to be able to solve, hopefully maybe resolve the issue together. Being flexible. To the extent that you can be flexible, sometimes giving employees a little bit of flexibility helps to manage a situation and it builds trust to say, you know what, my employer's got my back and they're going to help me with this. One of the things that, we talk about a lot with survivors that we work with is if they're terrified to go to work because they're afraid that, their ex-partner is going to show up at work, they're going to sabotage their work, whatever that may be. We talk with them a lot in safety planning about not having predictable routines. And so sometimes the conversation that we have is do you have to work at your job from 9 to 5 every day? And some places the answer is yes, but that's what it is. It has to be that way. And if that's the case, then that's the case, then we have to work around that. But sometimes it's not. And sometimes maybe, today I can work from 8:30 to 2:30, and tomorrow I can work from 8 to 4. And I can, if I can vary some of that, it helps manage some of the things that I'm concerned about. So having places that you can have some flexibility to open up and have some of those conversations. And then confidentiality is the key. Everybody doesn't need to know everybody's business, right? And all of us, we hear this in every place, right? You know what I mean? Like HR matters are confidential, and it's the same thing with this, is having some confidentiality. So if I can I can trust my employer and go with them with some of these things that are happening, it's going to help me, better be able to feel safe enough to have those conversations. So I want to make sure we have time for questions because I know my clock says we've got about 7 minutes, so I'll kind of stop here. But I want to leave you with this. I think that, we sometimes get so caught up in the day-to-day business aspect of things and sort of the routine and the output and the costs. And not that those things aren't important. That's what keeps our businesses viable. And we absolutely need to be worried about those things. But if you can switch your thinking slightly, investing in the well-being of your employees is an absolute investment in your business. You get hardworking employees, you get all-star employees, you get employees who have the best ideas, who have the best interests in your business in mind, who know that, if they know you're going to have their back, they're going to have your back, right? And that you're not dealing with tons of employee turnover, because we didn't even talk about the cost of that, right? Every time you have to onboard a new employee and what that costs your business. And so, really thinking about how we can have a sort of a more collaborative approach. And recognize that things that are happening for employees outside of the workplace are going to creep into the workplace. And how do we best deal with them? And it's going to be now more than ever, right? We think about all these 2020 stressors that folks are dealing with, online schooling and, financial struggles and, everything else compounded, health issues, all of those things. We're going to see it more and more in folks that are in our doors.
Okay. We did have one question, but it looks like Angela got a hold of that one. Mary DeWitt was wondering if you can come and speak to employers and their management staff on how to help their employees, give them some training on how to recognize it and how to refer people. And then Angela said that gave her contact information. So.
Perfect.
Yeah, Kathy, I didn't know your email address without looking it up. So I don't know if you want to throw it in there too.
Yep, I can put it in the chat box. Yep, absolutely. Yep. Stop this and I'll put it in there.
While people are maybe thinking of questions, there were a few things that I would add that came up while Kathy was talking. And one of those is, as you were talking at the end, like hurt people is a saying we say in mental health. And I think that that's kind of a little bit of what we see happening in our country right now. Like there's a lot of people that are feeling lots of different things. And sometimes people just go, hey, get over it. It's not my problem. Even somebody responding like that, I think is responding from a place of something, like maybe that's what was said to them in the past when they were experiencing something. But telling somebody to get over it I'm not sure ever actually helped anybody get over anything. I know for me personally, that I have a lot of anxiety, and if somebody goes, oh, don't worry about it, I'm not just like, oh, wow, God, I hadn't even thought of that. Thank you so much. That just infuriates me, and it hurts because it feels like you didn't hear what I said, because to tell me like, just, don't think about it. Like, oh, wow. Like if that was actually a solution, I would have done that by now. I don't choose to like sit around thinking about things. And that is hard to talk about. And even from a mental health, even being a mental health person in the mental health field, it's been a long time to be able to admit that and to say that to folks, but and COVID has not helped, like, again, like you said, there's a lot of things that are going on, the way so for some folks it's changed their lives, and so for some folks they had to continue like nothing happened. And how people are responding to that and coping with that is very different. And so having a little bit of understanding for folks, and like Kathy said, it doesn't mean that we change all the rules for someone, but sometimes we do things that we're just doing it because that's the way it's always been done, right? Like why? Yeah, does it have to be 8:30 to 4:30? Does it have to be 9 to 5? Why can't there be some flexibility? Can folks work from home? And why not? Like if we, usually it's like, well, we don't know if you're doing 8 hours of work. Why? Because one person probably 20 years ago didn't do their 8 hours, so now we're going to punish everybody. Like we have to think about, again, where are we coming from, and what are we doing, and why are we making those rules, and can we help folks? I guess you don't have to do any of these things. I'm just I would like to see I would like to see us be a little more understanding of what's happening in people's lives, and say, can we change things, or why are we doing it the way we're doing it? Does it have to be that way, really? Another thing that I thought of is, again, in mental health, we talk about what happened to you. A lot of times people are like, what happened to you? Or, what's wrong with you? If you say and even if you just say to somebody, what's wrong? If you say that to me and I'm experiencing anxiety, you're forcing me to say that like there's something damaged or broken about me. If I have to admit that I have anxiety, then that's like me you're like forcing me to admit that there's something wrong with me. And so I'm more likely to say nothing, I'm fine, right? And try and again, bury it, cover it up. Whereas if you say, what's happening? What's going on with you? Are you okay? It's a little more freeing, a little more for me to say, well, this is what's, man, I'm having a hard time. And that like, again, not get over it, but what's happening? How can we help you through that? So again, you don't have to be a counselor or a therapist. I mean, we do programs like mental health first aid and youth mental health first aid. It's noticing, it's recognizing, and then just responding like a human, just being human about it. Like I might not understand what you're experiencing. You might not understand what I'm experiencing, but to just say, like Kathy said earlier, that must be really tough. Thank you for sharing it. That is so empowering. That's so helpful for folks. There's a lot of concern right now about anxiety, depression, suicide ideation, that folks are drinking, people are using more substances, which can lead to other, choices that they wouldn't normally make. So, there's a lot of stuff going on right now. But these are uncommon times, and people are just dealing with the best they can, whether that's what they've learned in the past or whatever.